You have been told a lie about old garden wisdom. The lie is this: if it is cheap, simple, and passed down by grandparents, it must be outdated. That is nonsense. Some of the best garden fixes I have ever seen were not sold in a shiny package. They were pulled from a kitchen shelf, a shed corner, or a memory from somebody's grandmother who grew more food with less money than most people do today. And I am going to prove it to you. What you are about to hear is not a recipe for chaos. It is not a celebration of random folk magic. It is a practical list of old methods that still work because they make sense. They save money, they reduce waste, and in a lot of cases, they make your garden less dependent on store-bought products that you keep buying year after year. Now, I need to say something plainly. Some of these tricks are best used on paths, weeds, or non-edible areas. Some are excellent for starting plants or improving soil. A few are useful on the plant itself, but only when used carefully and in the right amount. I will tell you where each one belongs, because vague advice is how people waste a season. Let's start with the one people argue about the most: vinegar for weeds. Not all vinegar is the same. The weak kind in the kitchen is not a miracle. But on hot, sunny days, even household vinegar can burn small weeds back on gravel, walkways, between pavers, and in other places where you do not want anything growing. The trick is simple. You spray the weed on a dry, bright day. You hit the leaves directly. You do not drench nearby plants. And you do not pretend this is a magic root killer for every situation. It is a contact burn. It damages the top growth fast. The mistake most people make is spraying it on a damp morning and expecting a dead plant by lunch. That is not how it works. Sun and dry air help the leaves dry out after the spray hits them. If you use it on a cool, cloudy day, the effect is weaker. On a hot driveway, though, it can be very effective for quick cleanup. Now here is the old-school twist. In a garden bed, some gardeners used to pull weeds in the hottest part of the day and leave them right on top of the soil. That sounds sloppy to modern eyes, but it can work when you do it carefully. Small annual weeds dry out and become mulch on the spot. You are not hauling green waste away. You are returning a little moisture cover to the bed. The key is that the weeds must not already be seeding. If they have seed heads, do not leave them there. Bag them or compost them hot. And if the weeds have deep roots, like bindweed or quackgrass, do not fool yourself. Those need a real removal plan. People love to buy weed fabric. My opinion? It has its place, but it is not a substitute for a gardener who pays attention. A cheap spray bottle, a sunny afternoon, and 20 minutes of focused weeding can beat a lot of expensive products in the right setting. The next old trick is one of my favorites for starting cuttings: honey and cinnamon. Now, let's keep our feet on the ground. Honey is not a magic rooting hormone, but it does have natural antimicrobial qualities, and cinnamon is famous for helping discourage fungus on moist cut ends. If you are taking a tender cutting from basil, geranium, rosemary, mint, or another easy-to-root plant, you can dip the fresh cut end lightly into honey, then touch it to cinnamon, or simply dust the cut lightly with cinnamon before placing it into your medium. That does not mean you skip clean cuts and good moisture. It means you give the cutting a friendlier start. The mistake most people make is soaking the cutting in honey like they are marinating it for dinner. You want a light coat, not a sticky mess. Too much can gum things up and invite rot instead of preventing it. Now, if you want a more dependable option, aloe vera is one of the best old household helpers in the gardening world. The gel from a fresh aloe leaf can be used as a gentle coating on cuttings before planting. It is not some mystical growth potion. It is a soothing, moist, protective gel that helps keep the cut end from drying out too fast while the plant is trying to form new roots. Aloe is a good example of a free alternative to something people often buy in a bottle. If you already grow aloe in a pot by a bright window, you may already have a rooting helper sitting there doing nothing. Snip a leaf, split it open, and use the gel on the cut end. The budget version costs almost nothing because the plant keeps multiplying on its own. If you do not already have one, it is still a cheap houseplant to keep around. Here is where people go wrong. They use too much and they forget sanitation. A dirty blade can bring in more trouble than aloe can fix. Always use a clean knife or pruner. Make a fresh cut, then use the gel. That order matters. Now let me talk about a trick that sounds strange until you understand the reason behind it. Aspirin in the garden. This is not about medicine for people. Do not start turning your garden into a pharmacy. This is about salicylic acid, which is the compound behind aspirin and is related to a plant stress signal. Some gardeners use a very mild aspirin solution to help plants cope with stress and support their natural defenses. The idea is not that aspirin becomes fertilizer. It does not. The idea is that a tiny amount can help trigger a stronger response in the plant. If you use this at all, use it sparingly. One plain aspirin tablet crushed into a gallon of water is the kind of traditional home garden mix people talk about. Apply it as a light spray or soil drench only when the plant is under stress, or before a period when disease pressure is common. Do not turn this into a weekly habit. Too much of a good signal becomes a bad signal. The common mistake is assuming more is better. That is true in neither gardening nor life. A plant does not need to be bombarded with home remedies. It needs the right conditions and a small nudge when appropriate. And always remember this: when you are spraying anything, even a homemade mix, test on a small part of the plant first. Some leaves are sensitive. Tender seedlings are especially touchy. Now, turmeric. This one gets talked about like it is a miracle dust. It is not a miracle, but it can be useful. Turmeric has natural antimicrobial properties, and old gardeners sometimes used it on fresh pruning cuts or on the base of small transplants where rot is a concern. The idea is to dust a little on a clean cut or use it lightly around the root zone when you are transplanting something delicate. It is especially useful when you have trimmed off a damaged stem or cut away a soft, infected spot and want a little added protection. The mistake here is obvious. People treat turmeric like flour and coat everything thickly. That is too much. You want a light dusting, enough to cover the wound, not enough to build a crust. And if you are dealing with a serious disease problem, turmeric is not the cure. It is one small tool. Sanitation and proper removal still matter more. Now let's move into water, because this is where old gardeners were often smarter than modern people give them credit for. One of the best low-cost watering methods is the buried bottle trick. Take a plastic bottle, poke small holes in the lower sides, bury it near a plant with only the neck above soil level, and fill it with water. Water slowly seeps out near the roots instead of running across the surface. That means less evaporation, less waste, and deeper root growth. This is not fancy. That is the point. If you are growing tomatoes, peppers, or squash in a dry spell, this can help a great deal. The plant learns to grow downward to find moisture instead of staying lazy near the top. That deeper rooting helps in heat. It also helps if you cannot water every single day. The mistake most people make is punching too many holes or burying the bottle too shallow. Then the water drains too fast and the whole thing becomes useless. You want small holes. You want the bottle positioned close enough to the root zone to matter. And if you are gardening in heavy clay, water movement is slower, so you may need fewer holes and a little patience. If bending is hard on your knees or back, this is one of those jobs that can be done standing with a long-handled trowel and a little planning. You do not need to crawl around the bed to make it work. An even older water-saving method is the clay pot system, often called an olla. You bury an unglazed clay pot in the soil, fill it with water, and the moisture slowly seeps through the clay into the surrounding root zone. The soil itself decides how much it needs. That is the beauty of it. The plant gets a steady, gentle drink instead of a flood followed by drought. This method is excellent for hot climates and for gardeners who travel or forget a watering day now and then. It works especially well in raised beds and small vegetable patches. The cost is real, though. A proper clay pot is not free unless you already have one. But the budget version is to use a repurposed terracotta pot with the drain hole sealed and the pot buried carefully, or to make do with the buried bottle method I just described. The mistake people make with ollas is leaving them too close to the stem. That keeps moisture too concentrated right at the crown and can cause rot. Put it a little away from the plant so roots are encouraged to spread. Now let's talk about one of the most misunderstood garden amendments of all time, Epsom salt. People throw Epsom salt at everything. That is not the answer. But used correctly, it can help in one specific case: magnesium deficiency, especially in tomatoes and peppers. Magnesium is part of the chlorophyll machinery, which helps leaves make food from sunlight. When a plant does not have enough, you often see yellowing between the veins on older leaves. If you suspect that problem, one common old method is to dissolve 1 tablespoon of Epsom salt in a gallon of water and apply it as a foliar spray or a light soil drench every few weeks. Use it only if the plant truly needs it or if your soil is known to be low in magnesium. It is not a general fertilizer, it is a correction. The common mistake is using it because somebody on the internet said tomatoes love it. Tomatoes love a lot of things. That does not make every one of them necessary. If your soil test already shows adequate magnesium, more Epsom salt will not magically produce better fruit. It may just waste your time. And here is the honest truth. If you are buying a special bottle of magnesium supplement every season, you are probably paying for something a simple soil test could have told you for a few dollars. The cheap version is not a shortcut, it is knowledge. Now for coffee grounds. This one is popular, but it needs a careful hand. Used coffee grounds can be added to compost or sprinkled thinly on the soil in a thin layer. They contribute organic matter and can help improve structure over time. They are not instant fertilizer. They are part of the long game. A light layer on top can also discourage some slugs and snails in certain situations, though that effect is not absolute. The mistake most gardeners make is dumping a thick mat of coffee grounds around plants and calling it soil improvement. Thick piles can form a crust and interfere with water movement. That is not mulch. That is a problem. If you use grounds directly, keep the layer thin and mix them with other materials, or put them into compost first. That is the safer use. Now I know some people swear coffee grounds keep every pest away. I would not make that promise. But they are useful. They are free, if you drink coffee. And free is a beautiful price in a garden. Now let's step into one of the most effective old garden ideas of all: no-dig gardening. No-dig is not laziness. It is working with soil biology instead of fighting it. The idea is simple. You do not keep turning the soil over every season. You build on top with compost, mulch, leaves, cardboard, and organic matter. That protects earthworms and fungal networks. It also keeps weed seeds from being brought up from below. This method is especially powerful if your soil has been exhausted, compacted, or repeatedly churned. Old gardeners often did this without calling it no-dig. They simply kept adding layers and letting the soil improve underneath. The mistake people make is thinking no-dig means no work at all. No, it means different work. You still need to add compost. You still need to mulch. You still need to plan beds. But you stop disturbing the living structure in the soil every time you want to plant a row. If your back is not what it used to be, no-dig can be a gift. Less shoveling, less bending, fewer aches, better soil over time. That is a very good trade. And since we are talking about soil cover, let's talk about old paper and cardboard. Before plastic mulch and fancy trays, gardeners used newspaper and cardboard. A few sheets of plain newspaper can suppress weeds when wetted and covered with compost or straw. Flat cardboard can be used under mulch to smother grass and start a bed. Old egg cartons can start seeds or organize small transplants for a short time. The mistake people make is using glossy paper, coated paper, or too much cardboard without enough moisture. You want plain paper and untreated cardboard. You also want to wet it down so it conforms to the soil and begins breaking down. If you leave it dry, the wind lifts it and you are chasing paper across the yard. This is one of those budget wins that matters in a real backyard. If you have access to free cardboard, you can build a bed cover for almost nothing. Now let's get to the method that has probably saved more family gardens than any marketing campaign ever did: saving your own seed. A lot of gardeners were taught that you must buy seed every year. That is not true for many open-pollinated varieties. If you save seed from strong, healthy plants, you can keep a line going from year to year. Tomatoes, peppers, beans, peas, lettuce, and many herbs are good candidates, as long as you understand how the plant pollinates and how to keep the seed true. This is where people get mixed up with hybrid seed. Hybrid seed, often labeled F1, can produce excellent first-generation plants. But if you save seed from those plants, the next generation may not come true. You may get weak growth, odd fruit, or uneven results. That is not a flaw. That is how hybrid breeding works. It gives you a first-year performance advantage, not reliable seed saving. The old family garden solution was to choose open-pollinated varieties when seed saving mattered. You saved seed from the healthiest fruit on the strongest plant. You dried it thoroughly. You stored it cool and dry. Then you planted it again next season. The mistake people make is saving seed from diseased plants, weak plants, or poorly isolated plants and expecting a strong crop next year. Seed saving is not just collecting, it is selection. You are carrying forward what you want more of. My grandmother used to keep bean seed in paper envelopes in a metal tin. Nothing fancy, just dry, clean, labeled seed from the best pods. She was not trying to beat the system. She was building independence, one envelope at a time. Now, here is a trick that is old, simple, and deeply practical. Comfrey tea. If you have comfrey, you have a plant that can produce a powerful liquid feed when the leaves are soaked in water. The result is a strong, dark brew that gardeners use as a fertilizer tea. It is high in potassium and other minerals. It smells like a swamp, so let us not pretend otherwise. But the plants often respond well, especially fruiting crops. The easiest method is to pack chopped comfrey leaves into a bucket, cover them with water, and let them steep for a couple of weeks. Then dilute the liquid before use. A common ratio is 1 part tea to 10 parts water, though gardeners differ on that. Use it around tomatoes, peppers, and flowering crops that need support for fruiting. The mistake is using it straight. That is too strong and too smelly. Another mistake is relying on it as the only nutrient source. It is a supplement, not a complete diet. If you do not have comfrey, the budget version is to make what people used to call weed tea. Throw fresh green weeds into a bucket, cover them with water, and let them steep. That produces a crude plant feed. Again, it is not elegant, but it is free. And when you are trying to keep a garden moving without buying another bottle, free matters. Now let's talk about one thing that gets dismissed too quickly. This is not a miracle, but it is a smart soil habit. Mulching with what you already have. Grass clippings, shredded leaves, straw, and even dry weeds can all become mulch if used correctly. Mulch keeps the soil cooler, reduces evaporation, and feeds the soil as it breaks down. Many old gardeners never let the ground stay bare. Bare soil dries out faster and loses life. The mistake most people make is piling mulch against the stems of plants. That traps moisture at the base and can invite rot. Keep mulch a little away from the crown. Let the stem breathe. You want the roots covered, not the plant buried. If you have access to old leaves in fall, that is garden gold. Shred them if you can. If not, let them break down over time. Your soil will thank you. Now, one more old trick for cuttings and transplant shock. A little shade cloth made from whatever you have. Before modern nursery supplies, people often used boards, old baskets, or scraps of fabric to give newly transplanted seedlings a break from harsh sun. The idea is to reduce stress while roots settle in. A tender transplant that gets blasted by afternoon sun will wilt harder than one that gets a little temporary protection. The mistake here is keeping the shade on too long. That makes seedlings weak and leggy. Use it only for the first few hot days after transplanting, then remove it. You are not making a permanent home. You are giving the plant a landing pad. This matters especially in hot zones, where a spring transplant can suddenly get hit by a brutal warm spell. In cooler zones, timing is different. There is no single calendar date that fits every yard. You have to watch your last frost date, then watch the weather after that. Now, let me tie all of this together. The reason these old tricks get called unofficial or out of system is not because they are bad. It is because they reduce dependence. A gardener who knows how to use vinegar on a path, aloe on a cutting, a buried bottle for deep watering, compost layers instead of constant digging, and saved seed from the strongest plant is harder to sell on every little product. That does not mean every modern product is a scam. It does mean you should understand the job before you reach for the wallet. If you remember nothing else from this video, remember this. A good garden is not built on spending the most money. It is built on matching the right method to the right problem. Use vinegar carefully on weeds where you do not want life. Use honey, cinnamon, or aloe for gentle cutting support. Use aspirin and turmeric sparingly and only with a clear purpose. Water deep with simple buried systems when heat and dry weather make surface watering wasteful. Feed the soil with compost, coffee grounds in moderation, comfrey tea if you have it, and mulch that protects the surface. Stop digging when digging is breaking the soil apart instead of helping it. And save seed from plants worth repeating. That is how older gardeners kept going. Not because they had nothing, because they used what they had wisely. And when you do it right, the garden looks different. The soil smells dark and alive. The tomato plants stand steady instead of sulking in heat. The paths stay cleaner. The seedlings settle in without drama. The beds hold moisture longer. The weeds back off because you never gave them a blank piece of ground to own. And in a drawer by the kitchen table, there is a little stack of labeled envelopes. That means you do not have to start from zero next season. If you want, the next video can be the one on the cheapest natural pest control methods that actually work in a backyard without wrecking your soil. That is a topic worth doing carefully, because the difference between a useful home remedy and a bad one can be one hot afternoon in the sun.